So next section, we're going to talk about gels, particularly in relation to endurance events, athletes, recreational athletes, elite athletes, whatever it might be. I've brought some with me. Obviously, I've got the Science in Sport, which is what the athletes are probably going to use. And then I've got some high five ones. I think first, what are the benefits of taking gels and who should be taking them?
So the benefits of using gels, like we've kind of touched on a little bit before, is giving your body that quick, easily usable and quickly digestible fuel source. So that it can be used quite often. A lot of people tend to use them prior to an event or during an event, mainly so that they can start off that event optimally fueled, so maximising those glycogen stores and that energy availability, or to top off during an event. So like say for example, if we were talking about like a marathon or a half marathon, for example, those more kind of endurance based long form activities where you're going to be burning a lot of energy. And even if you're carb loading the day before, you've had your carbohydrate based meal 3 to 4 hours prior, you've had your snacks 30 to 60 minutes prior as well, realistically you're going to burn through a hell of a lot of those glycogen stores, and they'll probably start to become depleted, particularly towards the end of that event. So making sure you've got a quick and easily digestible fuel source to be able to use during that event and top off those energy stores is really important, to make sure that you can prolong that time to fatigue, and make sure, not just in terms of the physical fatigue, but the actual perception of fatigue and how difficult an activity feels can be reduced.
So I'll give you an example of an event. Let's say we're doing a half marathon and it takes someone 2 hours to do a half marathon. How many gels should that person, what would you recommend in terms of?
So generally what we go off is we go 30 to 60 grams per hour. But we might caveat that when we get over that 2 hour mark. So over that 2 hour mark, we would use what we call multiple transportable glucose. Multiple transportable carbohydrates. So glucose and fructose in a 2-to-1 ratio. Basically so that they can get absorbed through the gut quicker and you can have a higher intake of them. So with those higher intakes, past that 2 hour point, we'd be looking more towards 60 to 90 grams per hour to make sure that we can maintain that performance and that endurance output for longer. So say for example, someone who's doing a marathon and want to get a really good time, so looking at maybe the kind of sub 3 hour mark, it might be quite handy to use that kind of 60 to 90 gram range to make sure that we're fueling. Or say for example, if you're a cyclist that's doing a long endurance ride, even using them at those kind of intervals for, say if you're doing a 4 or 5 hour ride, aiming for 60 to 90 grams, using a gel and a combination of other carbohydrate sources, simple carbohydrate sources, can help to make sure you're topping off those fuel stores.
Okay, so take a look at the Science in Sport ones. We'll start with them. So with that example I've just used, half marathon, we're running a 2 hour half marathon. What would your recommendation be if we was using that gel?
So per serving, if you look at the per serving, is 22 grams in a 60ml sachet. So it's slightly below that 30 to 60 grams what we're looking at. So a lot of the time people fall foul of just thinking, okay, that gel's going to be fine, that will see me through. But as we've just discussed there, if we're looking around that 30 to 60 gram mark, then it's not quite enough. So that might be where you start to combine it with kind of other sources. So say for example, one of our mates who he's run quite a lot of marathons in his day, he tends to use gels, and he also uses things like dried fruit, it's like dried mangoes, things like that. So what was the example you wanted me to give, sorry?
Half marathon, 2 hours.
Half marathon, 2 hours. So you'd be looking at one of these every 60 minutes. So you probably only have the one really, realistically. You'd have it at that hour mark, and if you're trying to run it in 2 hours or sub 2 hours, realistically, you wouldn't be then having one for until you get to that 2 hour mark. But if you're trying to run sub 2 hours, then you don't really need that additional one. So really, if you fueled properly beforehand and you've had that meal 3-4 hours before, you've had your snack 60 minutes before, maximize those glycogen stores, you wouldn't really need more than one of these. Although quite often I see people using more of these than that in practice.
Okay, then we've got the high five ones. Let's do a comparison.
Do a bit of a side by side. So, high five per 66 gram serving, 23 grams of carbohydrate. So a gram more, let's say. So they're quite similar, really. But then in terms of salt content, so the sodium content for the electrolytes. So we've got an isotonic one here. Just trying to find if we've got salt on here as well. So 0.07 grams. So my conversion rates aren't great, so we'll stick with 0.07 grams compared to 0.01 grams in the SIS gel. So like we talked about when we were talking about electrolytes, if you're replacing your carbohydrate stores, again, you want to maintain those electrolyte balances as well. So looking at something like this might be quite a good option, but again, caveating that with what level are you performing at. If you're a recreational athlete, you don't need to worry about drugs tests, doping, etc. Whereas as an elite athlete, yes, that might provide a gram more in terms of carbohydrate content, which isn't really a massive amount, and it gives slightly more in terms of the sodium content. Is it informed sport? Is it safe for you to use, knowing that it's not going to potentially lead you to getting a ban as an athlete? So they're the things like we talked about at the start you've got to take into consideration.
So out of them two, for an athlete you'd recommend the Science in Sport, and for a recreational athlete, considering that sodium replenishment, you'd recommend the high five.
Yeah, and again, it's all about, it's obviously knowing these things, but also taking it into your own hands and, like I said, just doing a little bit of a side-by-side comparison when you're at home, having a little bit of a look, okay, in terms of per serving, am I getting any additional benefit from this gel compared to this gel? Does it have something that this gel doesn't have, or does it have a greater quantity of something that this doesn't have? And that's where, if people really want to get into kind of fine aspects and fine details, they're the things that you want to look at. But yeah, if you're a recreational athlete, there's nothing wrong with having one of those high five energy gels, because again, it's still going to provide you with the same or similar amount of carbohydrates, that quick release source of energy, and you've not got to think about the anti-doping risks.
Brill. How do we wrap up gels? What's the takeaway message for gels? Wait, if you got this far, you must be enjoying the conversation. Make sure to hit the like button and press subscribe to show your support. Back to the episode.
If I'm going to say anything in particular about gels, don't overuse them, because I know a lot of people who will solely rely on gels for, like, I tend to see it more commonly in runners, but I also see it in football as well, where player or athlete, for example, if they're a runner, they've not done the preparation really in terms of the nutrition prior to that event, so they've not had a good pre-race meal, they've not hydrated properly, they've not had that snack beforehand, and if it's particularly a kind of long distance endurance event, they've maybe not even prepared properly the day before as well in terms of getting that nutrition, that fueling right, and then use those gels as that kind of fail-safe option, when realistically 22 grams of carbohydrates, it's not going to cut it. And because of the form of carbohydrate they are, that simple form of carbohydrate, they're going to get used up quickly. They're not going to provide you with that gradual, long-lasting energy that fueling properly and maximising those glycogen stores will do prior to that event.
So next up, as you can probably see in the supplement stack we've got turmeric and we've got the ginger shots. Why are people taking either of those shots?
There's probably quite a lot of reasons people take them. Okay. Not always science-based ones, really. As we kind of briefly discussed before we jump on today, like, a lot of time it is more geared towards anti-inflammatory, antioxidant response, helping to reduce muscle soreness, DOMS, etc. But I don't think that's why a lot of people use them, in my opinion anyway. I think a lot of it is more around the marketing of it. In my experience, like, even just seeing them more readily available in kind of supermarkets, etc., the branding looks quite nice, it sounds quite good. Oh, this can help. Like, I've seen some making claims around gut health, digestion, etc. But like, when I've been looking at research, there's not a huge deal out there to back up those claims. It might be that there's one or two papers that have found that it had, in someone's subjective opinion, it reduced GI distress, or it might have helped them in terms of managing bloating symptoms, etc. But no kind of really large scale studies around those kind of aspects. A lot of it has been more geared towards, like I said, that recovery response more than anything, reducing perceptions of muscle soreness.
So there's quite anecdotal evidence, right? There's a lot of claims I've seen around both. Is there any legitimate evidence-backed claims for either turmeric or ginger?
Yeah, so it's more, like I said, particularly around antioxidant response, helping the body to deal with free radicals, reducing muscle soreness and damage. They're kind of the more solid claims that you would look at in terms of using ginger or turmeric shots. Whereas some of the claims that I know you've seen and probably quite a lot of people have seen, there isn't really that solid evidence base behind it. Like, if we compare in terms of quality and depth of research that's been done around these products, if you're comparing it, say, to creatine, one of the most evidence-based researched supplement that's out there, ginger and turmeric shots, things like that, they've not been around for very long. So I would say hold your horses really on any kind of solid conclusion, because there does need to be more research needs to be done to find out the long-term effects, not just those acute effects in terms of that subjective response to muscle soreness, DOMS, etc.
So the relevance for recovery or performance is really around reducing muscle soreness after exercise. Is one of them shots, I mean, for one, we don't know the content of these shots. It doesn't have it on the bottle, which is really useful. How much is enough then after exercise, timing, dosage?
Yeah, and it's difficult. There's a lot of conjecture, because there's a lot of studies out there that tend to use different timings, different dose, just to obviously find out that kind of optimal timing and that optimal dosage. And like I said, we looked at these, and there's no information on how much is actually in there. It just says organic pressed apple 81.9% for the golden turmeric, which I assume is meant to be an apple tasting one, and organic pressed turmeric 18%. So that percentage doesn't really give us any kind of indication really in terms of grams or micrograms how much is actually in there. Some of the research has used smaller doses, so like 4 grams post exercise, within an hour post exercise. Some have just used, rather than using the shots, 20 grams of either cooked or raw ginger daily, which doesn't sound particularly nice, to be quite honest. So there's lots of kind of different variations really, and there's not one that's really come forward and solidified, okay, this is that kind of best practice model to use at the moment, as we would do with, say, gels or creatine.
So there's not really a protocol around it right now?
Not a best practice one, no. I mean, if you were going to use it, like, most of the time you'll find the commercially available ones, like the shots, things like that. If you were going off roughly what some of the research has done, it'd be within an hour post. Some research has done, like, okay, what's the difference between having it an hour post, couple hours, few hours, a little bit like we were talking about earlier with the different types of recovery protocols in research. But again, from the research that I've read, there's not a huge amount of difference in terms of how that time frame actually affects it. I know from reading one research paper they did do different dosages, but I can't remember the outcome of it, to be completely.
And there's different forms, right? I've seen turmeric capsules. There's probably a powder out there. Yeah. There's got to be a powder.
Yeah, there's always a powder.
I'm guessing the capsules and powders are probably more concentrated, so you probably get a higher dose.
Yeah, you would think so. But again, commercially available, it tends to be more the shots, really. I've not personally come across a powder. I've heard about capsules. I've never personally come across them. Whether it's something that is commercially available, I'm not really sure.
Believe me, I won't give any store shout outs, but it's out there. So who should consider taking these, if anyone actually should consider taking them?
I mean, if you are considering taking it, it's like we're talking about with DOMS and muscle soreness earlier. If you have been doing really high intensity workouts or training, or you've done like a long distance event like a marathon, for example, where you want to try and recover, and you're happening to go into M&S for your post run meal for a meal deal or whatever you're getting, it might be something you want to consider. But again, I think just eating a balanced whole foods meal after that event or after that training session realistically is going to help to reduce those DOMs anyway. Getting the right protein into it, like we talked about omega-3s earlier, getting your omega-3 content in to help with that. Following that kind of food first approach, yeah, sometimes it might be labelled as kind of boring or not as glamorous, but ultimately, like I said, we talked about ginger shots, 20 grams of raw ginger, just using some ginger in your cooking, using some turmeric in your cooking, realistically it's probably going to taste a lot nicer than having a ginger or turmeric shot as well. So in terms of practical application, if you enjoy it a lot more, you're probably far more likely to continue with it.
I think that wraps that one up nicely. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed that clip, click here to get the full episode, and don't forget to subscribe.